All right, in this video, we're going to go over the problem of trust, and we're going to do a little history lesson as well. So it was about 2,000 years ago that the problem of trust started. That's when government took over coinage for standardized coinage. So we're going to start. We're going to start right here, right before that happened. And this is the here is the first large scale central market. And this was a temple operation. We covered this earlier, but this was the first time, at least recorded in history, that there was a mature and intentional system. I mean, this had a money construct. It was a process in place to make exchange for all of these people easier. And we have all of these different individuals, and they would bring all their different products and services together, and they would need to make exchanges. Uh, so on top here we had this admin, this leadership. These are administrators. They had these different exchange mediums of exchange options available to them, to include pieces of metal and then the IOUs. But really, what they did was they took all of their options and combined them and implemented just best practices. So these overseers built a system where it's just very standardized, very predictable. They made the exchange convenient for all these individuals, and the cost of that was just a few people that were empowered to oversee all this. And this is not really the problem of trust. And there are some risks with this. Like, they did have access to the resources, that were pulled together. They probably had the ability for forgery. They could probably blacklist people from the market and so on. But there's really no record of any issues like this happening. So we're not quite there to the problem of trust, even though we had a central authority. But then we had government standardized coinage, and we had found via the temples that it was helpful to have a central authority to set standards and make exchanges. It was more convenient. But then gradually, more of these operations started popping up. Our societies were growing bigger, trade was going larger, exchanges were becoming more complex. And then on top of that, each centralized market operation here would adopt its own color of standards for a variety of reasons. And if we continue along the same centralized theme, to set universal standards and make exchanges easier, governments were really the next logical step. They were in the best position to combine all of the outlying operations and set nationwide standards for everyone. Um, and then this would make exchanges and cooperation across even long distances much more convenient. And just this increased level of standardization, would be to everybody's benefit. Also, it's important to note that there were a couple of ways that governments could have gone about doing this. One was just staying removed from the operation and just setting standards and enforcing standards that the free market coinage could adopt those standards. But the other option, and the one that was chosen, and you'll see why here in a minute, was government very much inserting itself into the role of money and taking control over the function of money. And this started about 2,500 to 3,000 years ago, maybe a little bit earlier. And let's look at a little bit to the process to make standardized coins. Government had the authority of centralization. It could gather the metals from individuals or mines to create coins. It had legal authority to defend the money against counterfeit. But really, it was It was the ability to make coins that gave the governments this unique power that they discovered pretty quickly. And this was, even though they could provide standardization, they also had the power to manipulate the money supply to their advantage. And it didn't take long for a government to take advantage of this. And this was the first example. This was in the Roman Empire. This is showing debasement. And if you look at it, the base metal here is silver. This is what debasement means. You gradually add other cheaper metal content into the coin, and you're debasing the silver of this coin over time. And debasement is also known as inflation. So we'll walk through an example of what this would look like. So here in this, example, Roman society, everybody here has 20 coins, and the services that the taxes need to pay for, the government's going to provide, are also worth 20 coins. So everybody pays 10% of their coins in taxes, and the government is funded to provide government services. But now here's the government's money problem: is the government, has promised better schools. Now they find themselves in a situation where they need to go to war and they need more money. They have one option to divert money from their existing requirements here, but once a requirement gets set within the government, red tape has always been around. It's very hard to change these or reduce them. Another option to fund would be just tax an additional 50%, take an extra coin from every single person. And you can imagine the pros and cons of that not being maybe politically viable. And then you also had this third and fourth option. There are these other options. One is clipping. Clip 5% off each coin. You make 10 new coins. And this is a picture of what clipping used to look like. And then kind of along the same lines, debasement is when you take a valuable metal out of the coin and add in a cheap metal. That's called debasement, but it's essentially the same thing as inflation. So here's how, so options 3 and 4 are what the government started choosing, and this is what clipping, how it would unfold. And the government would clip 5% off each coin, and then take those clippings, create additional coins, and then give them to the individuals to fund the government initiatives. Here, the teacher and the soldier. And also note that when it comes to gold coins as a unit of account, the taxes were also raised a bit because the cost of these services didn't go down. These taxes have to make up for the 5% lost from each coin. But the clippings did create 10 new coins to fund these items. And it's important to note that the total amount of metal content, let's just say these are gold coins, the total amount of gold has not changed. It's just been clipped and reallocated. So the original gold's worth of 200 coins has not changed. It's just been reallocated. And this practice can be hidden, but it also adds up in a big way over time. So in this example, 5% over 5 years, these two individuals now have 35% of society's wealth. And the cost of these original services still hasn't gone up. So everyone's also now paying an additional tax, 1 coin per person, to cover these costs. And again, the total amount of gold content hasn't changed. It's just the gold has been reallocated kind of in a secret way to fund government initiatives. And this is why inflation is sometimes called the hidden tax, because on the outside of the coin, things might look kind of the same, but your purchasing power is going down. And there's also a downward spiral type theme to all this. Once a coin has been debased once, it's really hard to step away from that path. So the government gained authority over money and the ability to control it. And this happened about 2,500 years ago. And just to compare why this was the start of the problem of trust. So before government was in charge of coinage, we had these centralized operations. These individuals had no ability to had no control over these mediums of exchange. You couldn't debase or inflate like a cattle or a chicken. These were just pieces of metal that had to get weighed and verified using certain types of essentially blackboards or chalkboards, or you could use hardness measures. But there's really no way to debase that. So although they were essential authority, they had no real ability to exert any meaningful control. So that's why the problem of trust starts when standardized coinage starts. And then the problem of trust got much worse once paper money came to be, though this expansion of the problem happened over several hundred years. And it starts with the Bank of Amsterdam. So they discovered the creation of money out of thin air. Basically, they buy a double entry accounting, issue a loan, put it on the bank's books, issue liabilities against that loan as an asset. And to compare this concept with the clipping concept, they're essentially the same. It was a way to inflate or debase, or here it's inflating the money supply. And with a central authority, this was relatively easy to do. It was easy to do this because these coins look relatively the same, and then here we had these paper money, these standardized denominations. It would be really hard for individuals to know if the quantity of money in circulation was increasing, because the money looks exactly the same. So again, the amount of money is also obscured. And it's worth pointing out also that this usually negatively impacted people with the least financial knowledge, or the ones least aware of the potential for this problem. These are individuals that on fixed income, no assets, and really their skills and their knowledge base are not in high demand. These are low skilled laborers, and it was during this couple hundred-year period where the problem of trust expanded in size. And then one thing not helping when it comes to paper money based on debt is it's putting you down the path of a compounding problem. So to create the initial paper money, a loan is issued. Money is issued as a liability against that loan, but this loan is a promise to pay interest at a future date. So when that future date comes, additional money is also due, plus paying back the loan. So it's the same thing as if you use your credit card, 2 months later, you still have to pay that amount, plus now you're going to pay an additional 10%. And what would happen is that additional 10% would then be covered by an additional loan to fund that additional debt. So you can see that this puts you on an upward spiral. Once you commit to inflationary policies, you're really on a one-way street of ever increasing debt. And not helping that is the idea that a large amount of money was needed to support a central authority. So here, the idea of a central authority was to support the amount of money into different parts of the state or different industries if needed. And there were ways to do this, like tariffs, fees, taxes. If you have to, say take money from this region and give it to this region for whatever emergency. But to make this work, it requires flexibility, which requires a very large quantity of money. And this very large quantity of money means it's only backed by a very small fraction of reserve. So you're increasing your fractional reserve or decreasing your fractional reserves, however you want to look at it. But it's creating, you're increasing the fragility of the system by doing that. And so you have a self-perpetuating debt spiral, and you're also constantly increasing the fragility of the banking system, since you're always expanding your money based on the same amount of reserves. And then there's a really interesting problem when it comes to a state's ability to create money out of nothing. And we'll go through an example of this. So Amsterdam is the one that discovered that you could create money out of thin air. And if you go back to this example, the government inflationary practices gives the government the ability to siphon wealth away from non-skilled, non-asset, non-financially literate individuals, and place that money towards government initiatives. This is a very powerful tool for governments to give them not unlimited, but a significant advantage or a significant amount of power to fund their the defense of their nation, or other government initiatives. So if you're Amsterdam, if Amsterdam has this power, and you're a nearby nation that does not have the ability to siphon wealth from individuals and increase your own wealth, you're going to be at a significant disadvantage. And there's a great example of this. Has to do with the Duke of Wellington and the Bank of England, and Napoleon and the Bank of France. So the Duke of Wellington was backed by loans from the Bank of England. They created money out of thin air, siphoned a lot of wealth from the population. Essentially, the Duke of Wellington had unlimited funding to fight a war against France. And then on France's side, Napoleon distrusted bankers, and he would only use hard money. gold to fund his war effort. He sold the Louisiana Territory, received gold, paid his soldiers, and that's how he funded his war effort. And there were, a lot of factors that went into this war. But Napoleon was defeated in 1815 at the Battle of Waterloo. But it just has to be acknowledged that one side of this war essentially had unlimited money. So everybody adopted fractional. Everyone that watched that knew that there was no choice. All the nations adopted fractional reserve banking with inflationary practices just to make sure you could compete and survive. And this was also the rise of Keynesian economics, which was essentially an economic theory that was invented by governments to argue that central control of money was good for an economy. And these are the main Keynesian points, and it boils down to centralized control is good. Austrian economics then came to be as kind of a counter argument, and Austrian economics is essentially about the free market and the cumulative effect of thousands of individuals making their own individual informed decisions in the market, and that the market, everything in the market, including the money, is going to be fluid and changing. And when it comes to the money, it would just be the least fluid. It would be changing the least, and the market would eventually converge on the type of money that would change the least, that would resist large fluctuations. And I think you know what I'm going to say next, that this is exactly why gold emerged during England when the free market established the gold standard as the best practice for, found gold as the best money. So Austrian economics, they have a good counter argument for Keynesian economics. And then in the book I referenced, it was a really interesting point. I found that paper money would have never have existed in a free market. It was only because of government intervention that paper money came to be. It's just too ripe for fraud and disaster. And then the last two notes on Austrian economics is I think it was maybe it might have been ahead of its time, because one of its tenets was this idea or this capability to take metal coins and increase their divisibility, so to make new smaller units as needed. I'm not sure how feasible that would have been hundreds of years ago to take coins and turn them into different units and whatnot, just given the technology at the time. But really the biggest reason that Austrian economics would never have been adopted by nations, and that continues to this day, is that you would just be giving up your competitive power. I mean, you would be signing up not to be able to protect yourself. So the last point is Keynesian economics and Austrian economics. Keynesian relies on an inflationary practice to ensure an excess supply of money to support flexibility. Austrian economics is indifferent. It doesn't really matter inflation or deflation. You're still going to have the predictability that you need. And then an interesting point, and this is a well-regarded book, I got the point from this, it argues that in our current world, we're actually in a highly deflationary, our world is highly deflationary now by nature, and this is due to Moore's law and the exponential increase in technology and productivity compared to our money. So interesting to think about. If he's right, then what he's saying is what we need our money to do for us is actually the exact opposite of what our current money construct is doing for us. So in conclusion, the problem of trust started when governments gained control of standardized coinage, and this problem increased once paper money allowed these same concepts to be fulfilled in much larger magnitude. And Keynesian economics was invented and really was adopted by most nations just for the sake of national survival.